Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Betsy Brennan, President and CEO of the Downtown San Diego Partnership. On behalf of the Downtown Partnership and our sponsor, UC San Diego Extension, we want to welcome you to this first session of our Fed and Educated series. This digital event series is designed to help businesses thrive by engaging industry experts to share their knowledge and offer turnkey solutions to some of today's most prevalent business challenges. As you know, today's discussion is going to focus on building an inclusive workforce and community. The recent demands for social change and racial justice throughout the country have led many organizations and industries to look inward with renewed attention and focus. Many are wondering how they can create work environments, opportunities for leadership, and connections within their communities that will help to be part of making lasting change. Industry experts, local leaders, and organizations that focus on diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, and management training are being called upon to help provide guidance on how we can move forward together. We're fortunate today to have several of those regional experts here with us to help learn more about steps to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace culture and community. Today's session was made possible by UC San Diego Extension, a soon-to-be very exciting new resident to downtown with their property at Park and Market, but long a catalyst for driving change throughout San Diego, California, the nation, and internationally. For a quick update on what that property will mean for progress on issues like diversity, equity and inclusion, and others that are critical to the future success of downtown in our region, I'm thrilled to introduce to you Mary Walshock, Associate Vice Chancellor for Public Programs and Dean of Extension at the University of California, San Diego. And she's so much more. Dean Walshock is a sociologist by training, an esteemed author, a futurist, a connector, and more importantly, she is someone that I can lean on, that I can call with a crazy question or an idea and get some really sage guidance and advice. So with that, I am so pleased to introduce you all to Dean Mary Walshock.
Thanks so much, Betsy. And I'm only going to make a few remarks, but when Betsy approached us about being involved in some way, our team agreed we really wanted to be the sponsor of this first conversation. We feel the topic is so important. And we also are excited about the presenters that Betsy pulled together. So I just want to set the stage a little bit because it's a good question to ask. Why would UC San Diego acquire and develop a 66,000 square foot building at the corner of Park and Market in the heart of the city where the trolley line from the border reaches La Jolla and the buses moving east and west are the main transportation hubs. And I think it's important to underscore that it's primarily motivated by the values of our chancellor and of our faculty, that we have to be a more active participant in the life of the San Diego region, and in particular, in developing strategies that open doorways and build pipelines to opportunity for all people who live in the region. If I can be an academic for just a moment, economists talk about what contributes to economic competitiveness, and it's kind of changed over time. And I was with a friend this weekend who said, you know, it's really about the 3 S's. In the old days, if you wanted to grow a business or an economy, you focused on scale, right? You want to get bigger and bigger and more customers. In the information age, we changed from scale to scope, right? You want to have lots of diverse enterprises and diverse customers, diverse clusters in your region. But today, the competitive advantage is speed. And speed requires well-informed investors, managers, and leaders, constantly retrained and upgraded workers in all spheres of the economy. And we believe that UCSD, which is so on the cutting edge of social change, and so well equipped to respond just in time to the employer demands and the need for San Diego citizens to acquire their skills, not just through traditional academic degrees, but through certificate programs and other credentials, that we can play a role in the inclusiveness space. In particular, the existence of the trolley line means we have the opportunity to recruit promising talent from all corners of the county, do lots of education and training in the center of the city, help people get on the trolley and interview for high-wage jobs in good companies. We know in conclusion that even in the tech sector, 36% of the jobs don't require a college degree. They do require high school graduation. They do require certification and credentialing. And I hope that our panel today will talk about the ways in which alternative forms of credentialing and multiple centers of education and training are critical to assuring a truly inclusive workforce. And we want to be a partner in that effort. So thank you, Betsy. I'm looking forward to everyone's comments.
I am looking forward to having you down here very soon and the decades of work we can do together.
Yes,
so really looking forward to this for the region. Thank you for your leadership, Mary. And thank you to UC San Diego Extension for continuing to support a thriving downtown and region. A couple housekeeping notes on the format of today's webinar. We have received the questions you have submitted during registration and we'll try to address as many of them as time allows. If questions arise during the webinar presentations, please submit them through the question and answer function on Zoom. With that, let's get started. First up is Denise Hummel. She is the CEO of RevWork and Lead Inclusively Incorporated. She was named the world's leader in diversity and inclusion by Marshall Goldsmith and is particularly passionate about advancing female leaders. Ms. Hummel is a serial entrepreneur, having sold her cross-cultural business, Universal Consensus, to Ernst & Young LLP, where she became a principal leading culture, inclusion, and innovation for the firm. Prior to that, she practiced employment law and international mergers and acquisitions. Ms. Hummel also tried and won the first class action under the Americans with Disability Act in the 1990s. Welcome, Denise. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the invite. And I understand we have a number of individuals on from all sorts of sectors and industries, community, enterprise, and what have you. And I know that Tony is going to be speaking to some of the very significant community issues, and I'm going to look forward to that. As for me, I'm going to speak mostly to the organizational issues, so the issues related to companies. But to do that, I have to start with sort of just acknowledging where we are. So I will share my screen just with an idea of having a little bit of a placeholder to have this discussion. And it is a discussion, a virtual one, albeit, but a discussion. So just a tiny bit about us. We were a full service diversity and inclusion firm, and we are now a division of a larger company called RevWork. And the reason for that is the development of technology to basically make inclusion sticky. And I'll allude to that at the end of the presentation. Since we're trying to talk about practical tools to get this done, it is somewhat relevant. So I'll just give you a little bit of snippet at the end relative to that, to the extent that it's helpful. But I think that, you know, we would obviously be quite remiss to not talk about just the heightened awareness that we're dealing with right now in terms of racial injustice due to recent events. And I think in terms of me, my team, our clients, organizations generally, you know, we started, I think, with shock, and we went through grief. And we were very, very focused on just how awful the events associated with Mr. Floyd were. And at the moment, we're starting to move a little bit past that to what is the opportunity that we have in front of us? What are the gifts that he gave us in the aftermath of his death? So we are now actually in a position for the first time to have these discussions that before there was such a tremendous amount of reluctance to have in large organizations. So I've been doing this now for about 25 years. I've had no issues really engaging in very authentic discussions relative to gender, for example, and even disability. But getting conversations going with regard to racial injustice and inequities has been very, very difficult until now. But now we're dealing with, these very unique circumstances. As Will Smith said, racism is not new; it's just being filmed. Nevertheless, we're all experiencing something very, very different. So some of us are experiencing sadness, pain, anger, fear. Others are experiencing confusion. And the tools that we're left with are to demonstrate empathy as much as we can. And unlike what we initially thought growing up, empathy is actually not something that comes naturally. It's a learned behavior. It's a behavior that we used to learn as a society that was kind of driven by religion, church, going to church and going to the mosque and learning, about empathy under those circumstances, and sometimes learning about it at home based on the behavior of our parents or grandparents. But sometimes being the victim of certain behaviors that we learned kind of passively. It's funny because I lived in Italy for several years, and for our children, we had to choose in school. They could either go to religione or they could go to morale, which would be morals. But either way, whether my husband and I taught them morals or not, they were going to get some form of it. So nowadays, a little bit more uneven, and so we really do have to take the time to teach ourselves, to teach each other under certain circumstances, and even in the workplace, to be able to walk the talk of what empathy looks like, and how we can create safe spaces for those discussions. So if there are questions with regard to that, I'm happy to answer that. As if it wasn't enough, that particular circumstance happened right in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. First we're dealing with all these health issues and economic issues, and then one of the biggest sociological shocks that this decade or maybe even generation has experienced. And COVID-19 has actually had a very significant impact on women and people of color. I'll talk about women in particular because it's fascinating to see what is happening in the workplace. So not surprisingly, the initial impact on women was quite negative. And as these things go in terms of a bad economy, traditionally women will be more impacted, at least at first, because they have a disproportionate number of a percentage of the population that is either in lower level positions or part-time positions, which were the most fragile and the ones that were cut first. So initially, that was very, very much an issue. Now, what is really fascinating is the long-term impact on inclusion is actually quite significant, because the reasons why women had been historically marginalized in the workplace were for assumptions that were made that women, particularly those of childbearing age, would either have kids or had kids, that would prohibit them from travel or would make them less suitable candidates for high visibility positions. Lots of assumptions associated with that. Women leaving the workplace disproportionately to men in order to raise their children, et cetera. And the playing field has now been leveled, because although it has been quite an exhausting experience, for the most part, large organizations, companies have realized that we can go on in a virtual environment. Now, obviously, that isn't the case for all. There are a lot of businesses that have folded through no fault of their own. But for those who have survived and who had the means to move to a virtual world, that did happen. They did survive, and therefore remote work has become normalized, which has leveled the playing field for women. There are a lot of other little nuances too, because men traditionally have been socialized to have this sort of interaction, especially among each other, that women have not necessarily been socialized to have. And so that playing field has also been leveled, such that a person's actual gifts, their knowledge, their experience is way more important at the moment than the actual ability to interact, cronyism, et cetera. So that has been, another element. And most importantly, that men have actually been in a situation to understand just how complicated these duties are. And I'm hoping that my audio is okay. But I'll bring my microphone closer just in case. So they're firsthand, they are seeing what it's like to have the pressures to be working in the home and to be partially responsible for raising kids, or in this case, to even be giving them an education. So you're seeing shifts there. You're seeing shifts towards flex work out of necessity that women have wanted for decades in order to be, part of this experience. So, how are we going to make that happen? And how are we going to galvanize on this momentum? What I've been saying for my entire career, whenever I hear things like, from the World Economic Forum, it's going to take 212 years for gender parity to exist, and who knows when it will happen in terms of racial equality, then I always say this. If we deal with diversity and inclusion the way we do any other business initiative, okay, when I was a partner at Ernst & Young, we had a business initiative, there'd be a mission, there'd be a goal, there would be milestones to meet that goal, and there would be action steps to get there. And that's how we met our goals, not ad hoc, let's do a keynote here, or let's do, an employee resource group here, or let's have, Black Professionals Day or Women's Professionals Day. That's never going to get us anywhere. We have to be in a situation to actually take very significant steps and very, very organized, systematic steps to move in that direction. And that goes with, assessing, so doing organizational assessments, leadership assessments related to inclusion, following that with education that is as pinpointed and focused as possible, and then having a method by which to scale and sustain. It was mentioned earlier that, scaling, has its place, and so does velocity. But in the case of inclusion, it can't just be one person or 5 people in the organization. It has to actually be, an organizational transformation. So that's what the apply piece of this is like. So you probably have noticed that we did give you a link to what we call our inclusive Leadership Development Plan, or ILDP, as we note it internally. And you are getting it as a courtesy, as a result of our involvement and support of this particular initiative today. And hopefully you'll get that, either by email or in the chat. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but it's yours. It's a gift. It takes only a few minutes for you to assess your organization in terms of where you are in your development as it comes to this inclusion journey. But secondly, the second piece of this is the education piece, right? And we have historically spoken about unconscious bias And we thought it was going to be the solution. And for sure, it has been very significant to elevate awareness as it relates to unconscious bias. But if we stop there, it actually backfires. So we have to start with, here's how to elevate your awareness. Once your awareness is elevated that we all have unconscious bias, can't get away with it. If you have a brain, you have bias, including me and everyone on this call, unfortunately. As hard as we try, we still have it. We need to know how to interrupt those signals. We need to know what inclusive behaviors are and how to use them, and where we can embed them in the workplace, which is where the Inclusion Virtual Coach app comes in that I told you about before. So all I will tell you is about that is that there is now technology. So basically technology can be leveraged for behavior change. And all I'm going to tell you about that, because I think it's just important for you to know the tools that are out there. And I will put this in slideshow mode, even though sometimes Zoom freezes up, which is why I don't usually put it in slideshare mode. But if you can picture that AI, so machine learning in this day and age, can not only personalize learning to adapt to the learner's style, but to their schedule as well, where they could get nudge messages, for example, right before a team meeting to be reminded how to, 3 tips on how to conduct an inclusive meeting, or at an interview to be reminded how to check your bias at the door, and so on throughout the day. So that is just a tremendous eye-opening experience to be able to use diversity, to use technology to make the behavior of inclusion sustainable, so that all of us, as well-meaning as we are, can be reminded. That's another tool. So I just want to make this as actionable an interaction as possible. So I'm going to pause now and ask the team to field questions so that we can actually, I can be in a position to answer them. But that's just my little quick synopsis about what I wanted to share with you today.
Denise, thank you so much for doing that. I think the whole realm of AI and how technology can leverage diversity, inclusion training is really interesting. It really goes to where UCSD Extension is going with technology and entrepreneurship. And how did you come upon that? I mean, what have you found to be impactful with the technology that you're using?
Out of total frustration. We actually,
oh, your microphone is off a little bit.
Well, I might be muted.
Try that again.
Hi.
Why don't we, we're going to get back.
Does that work?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, we actually, when you say came upon it, just to be perfectly honest, we came upon it out of frustration that we were basically, we felt we had winning methodology. We were focusing on behaviors that were at the cross section of inclusion and innovation, where we were achieving reductions in attrition and increases in employee engagement for women and people of color, but we were unable to keep those behaviors sticky or sustainable. And so we basically went into stealth for about 1.5 years to see if we could marry the principle of behavior change and habit formation with technology. And that's really how it happens. I think this area is a lot of try and fail. I forget who the famous person was who said success is just, a series of failure that eventually stops. And in this area, we have failed to a large extent to make the kind of progress that we've been making. And so taking a good hard look at it is what helped us to really focus on technology as a means to move this agenda forward.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to segue to Tony Young and then come back to both of you for questions at the end. And just one comment from Tiffany, and her comment is that a reminder that reminders change behavior and facilitate long-lasting mindfulness.
Great.
So this technology really comes into play in the reminders as well. So
Thank
we
you.
will segue for a little while, then we're going to come back to Denise and ask a bunch of questions that we've received in advance and then through the Q&A chat as well. It's now my pleasure to introduce Tony Young, president and co-founder of Rise San Diego, a nonprofit whose mission is to elevate and advance urban leadership through civic engagement. Tony is the former council president of the San Diego City Council and proudly represented District 4. He authored the city's first fair banking ordinance, as well as legislation to create the Gang Prevention and Intervention Commission and the Small Business Contracting Ordinance. As president of Rise San Diego, Tony is responsible for building strategic relationships and advancing the organization's community relations. Tony is also has served on many boards, including just recently joined back to the Downtown San Diego Partnership Board, and really welcome and so happy to have him. On a personal note, Tony has been incredibly helpful to me throughout my career and has had many times where he listens to me. I can bounce ideas off of him, and I'm just so happy that he's here to participate with us today. So with that, I want to welcome Tony Young.
Thank you, Betsy. It's kind of strange because we know each other so well. We've worked with each other so well, and for you to kind of read the bio, it's like you could just tell folks who I am, and you didn't have to read a bio. But the fact is, Betsy, I'm so proud of the work that you're doing at the Downtown Partnership. And when I was on council, the Downtown Partnership was mostly businesses that existed in downtown. And now you have created a more diverse board with different viewpoints. You have nonprofits on there. And so you are definitely making amazing change happen in downtown. So I want to say thank you for that. I'm very proud of you, and thank you for being a friend and inviting me here today.
Thank you, Tony.
For some people who don't know, Betsy and I know each other because we both worked at City Hall at one time. And Betsy worked down the hall from me in District 1 with Scott Peters. And, I learned a lot at City Hall. My experience at City Hall was great. I got a lot of opportunities to learn about some of the issues and important policies that existed at City Hall and how they affected communities. And I got a lot of experience working with a lot of different and diverse communities. But one of the things that really struck me at City Hall is that the problem solvers, which were many of the policymakers and even in the mayor's office, they were not always solving issues based on their real experiences with those issues, and especially when it comes to those issues that were affecting communities like the ones that I came from. And so a lot of the decisions that they came up with are based on assumptions and maybe some of their life experiences, but really hadn't really dealt with those issues on a day-to-day basis. And what really bothered me at City Hall is that many times we'd be talking about an issue at City Hall and making a policy that was clearly going to affect a lot of community members in the city of San Diego. And I'd look in the audience and there's nobody from those communities that were there, not just on the council, but in the staff, representation from the staff, and definitely not representation in the audience. And that truly bothered me because what happened often is that we came and decided on issues and made very bad decisions based on that because those lived experiences did not inform us on how to make the right decisions. And so as I transitioned out of City Hall and decided eventually to start a nonprofit, the nonprofit was based on leadership. And it's interesting, I really enjoyed Denise's presentation because in some ways what we're doing is the juxtaposition of what we do is that we believe that the answers that many of the issues that the community is facing, the city is facing, and in fact the boardrooms are dealing with, is that the answers are in those communities that I deal with every day, right? So as we work with these community members, they are the ones that are going to help solve the most entrenched issues in the city of San Diego. Why? Because they live those issues. And I would also say that as as you're looking for a diverse workplace, a diverse organization, you're not doing folks a favor by allowing people of color and women, different genders to participate or to be hired or work in those places of employment. You're actually benefiting from it. And so you should not look at it as an opportunity to give. It should be an opportunity to actually win and gain. And so that's kind of the way that we look at it. Rise San Diego focuses on identifying the smartest people that we can find in the city of San Diego and these urban communities, and trying to give them opportunities to develop as leaders from an authentic, real place, to not identify technical solutions. Many of those solutions that we identified at City Hall, where we would, there would be drugs selling on the corner, and then we put a light post up, and we think that would solve the issue, because all the people would not be under that light post because they can be seen selling the drugs. They would go somewhere else. That was not a solution. What we look at when it comes to Rise is opportunities for real, true, adaptive leadership solutions. And I would suggest that, when you identify a diverse workplace, you're going to get true adaptive solutions, because many of those lived experiences will help inform those decisions. So we have done a lot of work with these community members. And one thing I have totally understood, based on my experiences with the leaders here in the city of San Diego, these urban leaders, is that they're very smart. They're very thoughtful, and they have a collective understanding of some of the issues that need to be addressed. And so I won't spend a lot of time talking about all those issues that we've identified. I think there'll be a great time for question and answer, but I would say that, these are individuals in this community that will help solve the problems, the issues of homelessness, the issues of employment, education. One of the reasons why we fail so much is because we don't include them. And as we move forward throughout the city of San Diego's, challenges that we're going to be dealing with in the future, we should make sure that we include these young leaders. And Rise San Diego is trying to do our part in making sure that happens. So Betsy, thank you for allowing me to talk about this, and I'm open for any opportunities for question and answers as we move forward.
All right. Thank you so much for those kind words, Tony. And just for the more than 50 people on here today, if you have anybody that might be good for their leadership program, we have a person in their leadership cohort this year, Danny Garcia, from our Clean and Safe team. And she is amazing, and she is growing so much as a leader through the program. So I would highly recommend Rise San Diego for anyone out there looking for an urban leadership program, because you will grow as a person and your organization will definitely benefit from being part of that as well. So let's go to some of the questions that we've received. We received some today and we received some in advance. So we're going to start with Julianne, and her question, and it's to both of you. We'll start with Denise answering, and then Tony can follow up. Has there been any research about how the burden of taking care of families during COVID has been picked up by men and women? I saw some stats that said men think they are absorbing 25% of the workload, and women think men are doing 10% more. So has anything really changed? New circumstances, but same old outcome. I'm gonna let you both answer that one.
Yeah, I think, we have to distinguish between perception and reality for sure. Although, as the phrase goes, perception is reality, right? So I think what those stats probably represent is that women are still feeling like they are carrying more of the burden. Historically, when there's a crisis, more of the same tends to be augmented, right? So if women started with having a disproportionate share of taking care of elders, that's probably going to continue. I think the only difference likely is that there's going to be some more practicality associated with this. So, for example, if you have a couple, let's just for the ease of discussion, call it a heterosexual couple, traditional male husband, father, female wife, mother. Everything's going to depend on what's happening. Did one of them lose their job versus the other? Did one of them take a pay cut? Is one of them furloughed? And it's gonna start to be a practical analysis, right? Who was the one who was actually freed up to do, more of the share of the workload when it comes to non-work or domestic related or family related projects. So I have to tell you, I am very optimistic about what I see. I see men, colleagues of mine, male colleagues saying, I had no idea, and I do now. And I really get it. I have leaders who I was just on a call recently, and his right-hand woman, so basically, more or less a chief of staff, is attending the call with her baby in her arms, and the baby is reacting to her boss, who happened to be male, and they have a relationship because this baby is on her lap during their interactions now. So things have definitely shifted in terms of perception and statistics. I guess that probably remains to be seen.
Yeah, Betsy, I don't have any statistics on that, but we've had a number of conversations about COVID at Rise San Diego. We have weekly discussions related to that. And from an anecdotal perspective, I would just say that all the issues that have impacted women, especially women of color, over the last 50 years or even more, are exacerbated now, and they are it has made it very difficult for them to present. So, for example, I have an employee who is the primary caregiver to her children most of the time, and throughout the entire meeting, you're going to hear the kids. She's juggling both. She's cooking lunch, making lunch, but she's also trying to run a program, and she does a very good job at it. And then you have a lot of single family homes here, and most of the time the female is the caregiver, is the person who's taking care of the children. And so it makes it very difficult for especially women in some of these urban communities to work. And then also, of course, now you have the school, right? They have to go to school. The kids have to go to school, and the women have to work, because usually a single family economic situation, a single mother, and now you have even more difficult situations. So that's what I'm seeing in these communities.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a challenge. And I've been going through some of that myself. I mean, my children start school on Monday, have this job, was a single parent for quite some time, not now, but definitely I have a lot of empathy and feeling for people right now. And let's talk a little bit about the role of empathy in this moment and how it relates to diversity and inclusion. We can start with Tony. Have you found people to be more empathetic in this time, or do you feel more frustration, or what are you seeing in the urban environment?
I see a lot of frustration in the urban environment. The empathy is there, but the frustration has, as you can see, literally spilled out onto the streets, right? And so that is something that we talk to our leaders about, is that compassion and empathy is very important as you try to solve issues and problems. You have to listen. You have to try to understand. And some of these very difficult issues that are exacerbated by COVID-19, some of them aren't getting solved simply because people want to be heard and not listen. And therefore empathy doesn't manifest. That's what I'm seeing.
Thanks for that, Tony. Denise, anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I think I think leaders are by necessity realizing that they need to augment their skills of empathy and learn how to initiate these conversations and be there, be present for those conversations. And I think that although these conversations have become more acceptable and in fact necessary, you know, the extent of the magnitude does change significantly with the person's experience of this. So for example, as a white person, I've experienced a lot of everything from confusion to guilt, but I can turn it off at night. It's my life does not depend on having those feelings or not having those feelings. The feelings that I've heard expressed from Black colleagues, for example, a Black mother, that comes to mind. It sounds to me like PTSD. I mean, she's describing that it's hard to concentrate at work because she is afraid to allow her child to even play outside, let alone, let's say, the parent of a let's say, young Black male who might be even, more at risk, say teenage, age and above. So we're all experiencing very different things. Some of us can turn it on and off, and some of us can't. But in enterprise, I am seeing companies, senior leaders, so C-suite leaders, CEOs, CFOs, realizing that they have to have these discussions. They might not be equipped to have them. They might need coaching, they might need help, but they know that they have to have them, which to me is sort of a shining light of hope.
And Betsy, I would just say, Denise, I love what you said, because what we have found working with some of the, and these folks that we are working with are prominent leaders. They're on city council, they're running large departments, is that there's also a lot of pain out there, and even with our leaders, and especially with our leaders, who sometimes can't even tap into that. And if they can't tap into their own pain and their own issues, they're going to have a very difficult time tapping into or being empathetic to others. And so that is a major issue. We have leaders at times at large companies, political, who have not truly addressed their internal issues. And how can you do that? How can you be empathetic if you haven't done that?
Yeah, it's an interesting endeavor, and I'm so glad that both of you are really doing the work with people, because oftentimes they might need to feel like they have to be strong and can't let those emotions out. So it's so wonderful to have groups like yours, Denise, and yours like Tony, that can help those people through that work and really help bring out the very best in them so that they can support all of their employees and we can have a better society. So thank you both so much for everything you're doing. We're going to switch a little bit around here, and we're going to go into a topic that I don't think we address quite as much as a community. I know over at Options for All with Ken Barnes and the work they're doing, they do. And so maybe you all have some good insights into this world too. But what do you believe will be the implications for adults with disabilities and access to employment and retention in the COVID world? What should we consider under an inclusive leadership workplace lens would be the new barriers and challenges for employment for adults experiencing disabilities? Do you want to start with that one, Denise?
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic, right? Because I was, in my former days, I was an attorney, and I litigated the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act way back when, and here we are. So let's see, that was 1992, I want to say, and here we are decades later. Not that much has changed for that group of people either. There have been very significant changes in terms of wheelchair access, bathrooms, so I'm not diminishing that. But in terms of hidden disabilities, we're still struggling as a society with that. And so I would say, COVID-19, it's interesting, brings up a whole bunch of things that you would never even consider. I'll just tell you that I live on the 24th floor of a high-rise down, down by the bay. And I got fined for not wearing my my mask in an elevator where I was the only person in the elevator. And the reason why I wasn't wearing it, frankly, is I'm claustrophobic. So I live in a high rise. I know it's crazy, and I fly more than anybody else that I know. But I have a hard time with it. And so if I'm not in an elevator with someone, I'll take it off. Well, there's cameras in the elevator, and I had to go defend myself about the fact that I have this, you know, call it a disability. So there are hidden disabilities, I think, that are going to come out, you know, respiratory issues and other issues as a result of COVID. And then the question, of course, is going to be, we have limited resources, right? Because the economy is doing really poorly. So in an era, for example, with diversity and inclusion, where nothing could be more important than the dialogue that we're having now, we're still, our chief diversity officers that we're dealing with and VPs of diversity, they're not getting the budget or the headcount that they need to make this happen. So I don't know. I guess I'm as concerned about, you know, people with disabilities as a diversity characteristic as I am with people of color and with women from a resource point of view. I'm not sure, you know, other than that and the specific nuances that COVID-19, that the disease itself might provide, whether or not we'll be on any sort of a different trajectory on that particular issue.
I would just say just quickly, Betsy, that you know, I'm excited about the new adaptive technology that's out there for people with disabilities. I think that might allow maybe more participation. However, what we're seeing and a lot in our communities that we represent is that there's a lot of emotional and psychological impacts in regards to COVID-19 now and moving forward, and people who have those types of disabilities seem to even suffer more because of the isolation and some of the anxiety that comes out of it. So that's one of the other things that I'm seeing when it comes to the issue of disabilities.
It's really interesting. Thank you both for that question, for answering that question. From Tiffany, this is a good question. We'll start with Tony because it's an interesting topic. Is it appropriate to offer mentoring from white privileged leaders to Black, Indigenous, and people of color? Or to Tony's point about the benefit of learning from communities looking for equality, is there an alternative structure to bridge these types of gaps?
Well, I don't think it's an either or question. Of course, you know, there's mentoring that can happen, opportunities for that in many different ways and forms. But you should also understand that there are plenty of opportunities for you to learn and for you to understand and for you to listen as a privileged white person. So if you take that opportunity and go from that perspective, and have a true, and I keep saying authentic relationship with people of color, then I think you'll probably be much more, it'll mean much more, be much more meaningful in regards to your relationship.
Great, thank you so much. What about you, Denise? Any thoughts on that?
No, my mind is going to you know, resources that we can alert the audience to in terms of how to, you know, have difficult conversations, for example. I mean, I hear every day, and I'm sorry, I'm being, you know, my mind just wandered. I just had this ADD moment of what people really need to hear is how to conduct these conversations. And I hear this very, very often in terms of white leaders in particular, you know, not a matter of privilege, just maybe a matter of, I don't know how to have this conversation and how do I show up authentically and not look like an idiot. And so I think there's something to be said for us to, I don't know if there's time, if there isn't, it's fine. But in terms of the direct question about mentorship and, is it appropriate for white privileged leaders to mentor, let's say, black leaders or managers aspiring to be leaders or people of color, what have you. I might have somewhat of a unique viewpoint on this. I feel like it's incumbent upon the sort of the majority in power, wherever that, whatever that is, wherever it is, to take a concerted, to make a concerted effort to support those who would otherwise be considered outside the power structure. So in Jamaica, that might be white people, because the majority population is Black. There might, there might be a need to equate the playing field in that respect. But in the United States, Caucasian people are, and Caucasian males are the majority in terms of the power structure. And so this whole concept of really not so much mentoring, but sponsoring people who are, non-male and non-white by those who are in the power structure is actually fairly significant if we're going to level the playing field. It's like that same discussion about legislation. Well, why should we have legislation why should women or people of color have an unfair advantage? Why do we need legislation? Because we had legislation that was systematic discrimination, not just slavery, but Jim Crow laws all the way through the 70s. And there's even some still on the books today. We had women who were not able to own property legislatively without their husbands. So, this whole leveling the playing field is wide open, and people have all sorts of political views on it. My viewpoint is very practical. We need to accelerate equity for everyone. And whatever we need to do to get there, we should be doing it.
Great. So this question will go to Tony first, and it's from Sarah. What are a couple of things that our listeners can implement in the next month to start thinking about these issues more thoughtfully?
I think the first thing that I would recommend is true reflection within themselves, to sit somewhere, to write down some of their challenges that they have in regards to full inclusion and diversity. And we all have them. And I think that reflection time would be very important before you address or try to address anybody that you're interested in engaging. And then the second thing is to engage, right? To have a conversation with individuals that are from a different either gender or race that you can have a conversation with. But it's more about listening. And that's the biggest issue these days, is that we don't listen. We want to talk, we want to mentor, we want to guide, we want to give information. But really what should happen is that you should stop, have the conversation, stop, and just be an active listener, be a curious listener. And I think that would be the first thing that you do moving forward on this.
Thanks, Tony. That's something I'm still working on each and every day.
All of us are, right?
Denise, what about you?
Yeah, I guess I would, focus on authenticity, on showing up with all of our, frailties, and just saying, look, I do not have the answers. All I know is I need to ask the questions, and being able to be vulnerable about your own biases. So for example, I will often tell people the story of how I hate tattoos. Okay, that's not a demographic diversity, but it's a difference in people, and I would make all sorts of assumptions associated with that. And in the course of teaching other people is when I realized, oh my gosh, you could be losing the most amazing talent that is right there in front of your nose because you can't get beyond this one little assumption that you've made associated with this. And from that moment on, the second my eye catches a tattoo, I will say, you will not do this. You will not allow, an unfounded assumption to get in the way of knowing the incredible beauty, talents, etc., that this person, gifts that this person has to give you. So I think it's just about awareness and authenticity and curiosity and listening, all the things that Tony has been mentioning, but on a just very authentic scale of not being afraid to engage.
That's it, Denise. I mean, vulnerability is really important, right? And you have to be vulnerable, but that takes courage, right? You have to be vulnerable about not only to be open to hear what other people might say to you, but also you got to allow you, I think, to really kind of go into some of those issues that you have internally if you allow yourself to be vulnerable. You can do that.
Great.
You can start that today, Betsy.
I work on it every single day, and it's a journey for sure. My speed round last question. I know there's so many materials and things that people resources for people, but if you could choose one or two books or articles for people to read, what would those be? Either of you want to, Denise or Tony?
The first one I would have, I think, from where I come from, I think Leadership Without Easy Answers by Heifetz. I think that would be a great way to understand how not only to solve problems, to address issues, but also to understand other people's point of view. I think to solve problems. And I think that's a book that I would recommend to everyone. Leadership Without Easy Answers.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Denise?
Yeah, and there are, I would, for those of you who have children, I think I would start with some of the children's books, like The ABC of Equality, or there's a book called What If We Were All the Same? Because I think that, that this issue starts at home. And so if we don't make assumptions, but we actually actively teach our children, I think that helps. I like some of the books that focus on sort of the business impact, for obvious reasons, that's kind of my thing. So I like Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. I like approaching this from the point of view that if we were all the same, what trouble we'd be in terms of getting differing viewpoints in order to establish, products that are right for as large a group of people as possible, services, keeping all stakeholders in mind. So I tend to, look at it a little bit more in terms of business impact, also because that's what gets the attention of senior leaders is, showing them that this is actually can be a lever for business performance. So I know I'm running the whole gamut from, the house with little kids to senior leaders, but that's really what it's going to take to get the job done.
Well, thank you so much, both to Denise and Tony, and to UC San Diego and to Mary for participating today. We have put quite a bit of this information in the chat as we went, but we will also be making a recording of this webinar, and it will be available tomorrow in our follow-up email to participants, and we can put some of these links to the resources that both Tony and Denise talked about today. If you're interested in additional professional development opportunities with our regional leaders, we encourage you to check out the schedule of topics for our future sessions of Fed and Educated. We had a great showing today and can't wait to get into our next topic, and just energized by today's topic as well. So with that, stay safe, stay strong, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Denise. Take care.